Imagine waking up one morning and seeing headlines everywhere. The world is drowning in debt. The United States owes trillions. China owes trillions. Japan owes even more. Europe is buried in obligations. Developing countries are struggling with repayments. Every government seems to owe money, which raises a strange question. If every country is in debt, who exactly is the money owed to? Who is the lender when the entire world seems to be the borrower? To understand this mystery, we need to start with a simple truth. Countries do not operate like households. When a family takes a loan, they borrow from a bank. When a country borrows, it usually borrows from millions of people at once. Governments raise money by issuing something called government bonds. A bond is essentially an IOU. The government promises that if you lend it money today, it will pay you back later with interest. And these bonds are bought by investors all over the world. Large banks buy them. Pension funds buy them. Insurance companies buy them. Investment funds buy them. Foreign governments buy them. And sometimes even ordinary citizens buy them. So when people say the United States is deeply in debt, that does not mean it owes one giant bank somewhere. It means the U.S. government owes money to millions of investors who purchased U.S. Treasury bonds. Some of those investors are inside America. Some are outside. In fact, a large portion of U.S. debt is actually owned by Americans themselves. Retirement funds. Mutual funds. The Federal Reserve. State governments. Financial institutions. Even individual investors. Then there are foreign holders. Countries like Japan and China hold large amounts of U.S. Treasury bonds. Why would another country lend money to the United States? Because U.S. debt is considered one of the safest investments on Earth. The American government has a long history of paying its debts, and the U.S. dollar is the dominant global currency. This makes U.S. Treasury bonds a place where global investors park their money during uncertain times. But here is where the system becomes fascinating. Countries are not only borrowers, they are also lenders. China owes money, but China also owns huge amounts of foreign debt. Japan owes money. But Japan is also one of the world's largest lenders. The same pattern appears everywhere. Debt flows in circles across the global financial system. Country A owes money to investors in country B. Country B owes money to investors in country C. Country C owes money back to investors in country A. It is less like a straight line and more like a massive financial web. Now let's add another important piece of the puzzle. Central banks. Every major country has one. In the United States, it is the Federal Reserve. Central banks play a powerful role in government debt markets. Sometimes they buy large amounts of their own country's bonds. This process is often called monetary expansion. It means the central bank creates new money digitally and uses it to purchase government bonds. In simple terms, part of the debt is owed to institutions that can literally create currency. This may sound strange, but it has become normal in modern economies. After the financial crisis of 2008, central banks around the world began buying massive amounts of government debt. And during the pandemic years, this trend accelerated dramatically. Governments borrowed heavily to stabilize their economies. Central banks stepped in to absorb large portions of that borrowing. But debt does not only exist between governments and investors. There are also global financial institutions, organizations created specifically to lend money to countries. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. Regional development banks. These institutions provide loans to governments that need support, especially developing nations facing economic crises. But even these organizations get their money from member countries and financial markets, which again brings us back to the same global cycle. Money moves through the system in a continuous loop. Investors lend to governments. Governments spend into the economy. The economy generates income. Income returns to investors. And the cycle begins again. Now, in stable times, this system functions relatively smoothly. But during geopolitical tension, things become far more complicated. And this brings us to the present moment. The growing conflict between the United States and Iran. Whenever military tensions rise, financial markets react. Investors become nervous. Oil prices often surge, global trade routes face uncertainty, and governments increase spending, especially on defense. War is incredibly expensive. Modern conflicts cost billions, sometimes trillions of dollars, which usually means governments borrow even more. During major wars in history, national debt often explodes. The United States saw massive debt increases during World War II. Many European countries did as well. But interestingly, war does not always weaken government bonds. Sometimes it strengthens demand for them. When uncertainty rises, investors often run toward assets they believe are safe. And U.S. Treasury bonds are still considered one of the safest financial assets in the world. So even as global tensions increase, demand for American debt can remain strong. But conflicts like the tensions between the United States and Iran introduce another risk. Energy markets. Iran sits near one of the most strategically important oil routes on the planet. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which a large portion of the world's oil supply passes. If conflict disrupts this route, energy prices could spike dramatically. Higher energy prices ripple through the entire global economy. Transportation becomes more expensive. Manufacturing costs rise. Food prices climb. Inflation increases. And when inflation rises, governments often need to borrow even more to support their economies. So geopolitical conflicts can indirectly increase global debt levels. But here is the deeper truth. Debt itself is not always a sign of economic weakness. In modern economies, debt is a tool. Governments borrow to build infrastructure. To stabilize economies during recessions, to fund scientific research. To respond to emergencies. To defend their nations. The real issue is not whether debt exists. The real question is whether that debt remains manageable. If a country grows faster than its debt grows, the system stays stable. But if debt grows much faster than the economy, problems begin to appear. History has shown this many times. Countries that cannot manage their debt sometimes face currency crises, banking collapses, or painful austerity measures. Yet large economies with strong currencies operate under different rules. The United States has a unique advantage. Because the US dollar is the world's primary reserve currency. Global trade is largely conducted in dollars. Oil is priced in dollars. International finance runs heavily through dollar-based systems. This creates constant global demand for dollars and U.S. government bonds, which allows the United States to borrow at lower costs than most other countries. But even this advantage is not infinite. Debt levels across the world are now higher than at almost any point in modern history. Governments, corporations, and households have all borrowed heavily over the past decades. The global financial system has become deeply interconnected, which means a shock in one region can spread quickly across the world. A financial crisis, a supply chain disruption, or a major geopolitical conflict, each has the potential to stress the global debt system. And that is why economists watch international tensions so closely. Because wars are not only fought with weapons, they are also fought through economic pressure, sanctions, trade restrictions, currency controls, financial isolation. All of these tools can reshape the flow of global money. And in today's world, the battlefield of finance can be just as powerful as the battlefield of armies. So when people ask the question, if every country is in debt, who is the money owed to? The answer is not a single person or a single institution. It is owed to a vast network. Investors, banks, pension funds, insurance companies, central banks, foreign governments, international institutions, and sometimes even the citizens of the very country that borrowed the money. Debt in the modern world is not simply a burden. It is part of the engine that drives global economies. But like any powerful engine, it must be managed carefully, because when debt grows too large, or when geopolitical tensions shake confidence, the system can begin to tremble. And that is why understanding how global debt works is more important today than ever before, especially in a world where financial stability and geopolitical conflict are becoming increasingly connected. The question is no longer just who owes the money. The real question is whether the system holding all that debt together can continue to hold. And that is one of the most important financial questions of our time.